core connection is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be focusing on the core, and that doesn't mean we're going to be doing abs for 2 hours, for sure. And I think first off, we need to kind of figure out what is the core, because this is whole... If you look through the books, if you think of CrossFit, people think of core, they think of like abs, don't they? You know, the 6-pack abs, 8-pack abs, whatever. If you go into more anatomy books, it becomes a little bit more complicated. Some people would think of the core as this band around underneath the ribs, from underneath the ribs to the pelvis at some point, and that varies a lot depending on what you're looking at. Some people say the front, some people say all the way around. It becomes very complicated. The definition I like is everything from the pelvis up to the shoulders, because I think that's all inclusive, and you can't just isolate one bit, because you can, but it becomes sort of, I'd be doing 20 of these things rather than 3, where I'm looking at shoulders and arms, hips and legs, and then core in the middle. So this core thing is in the middle, everything from your pelvis up to your shoulders and all the way around. So we've kind of got that figured out. So you can even kind of now start to connect to your core in the way that you're sitting, or maybe you're lying against the wall, or maybe you're lying down on the floor. And start to think about the relationship to your core when you're breathing, when you're sitting, or when you're lying down. What's it doing? Well, we'll get a little bit deeper into what the core does in a little bit. The core also includes that bit of the body called the lower back, which is like the bit that, you know, it's the bit that we kind of think about when it tends to kind of go wrong in humans a lot. It's one of those complicated parts of the body, like the knee. It goes wrong in part because when we were closer to chimps than we are to where we are now, we had a very straight spine. And that's because we were on all fours and we were running around. Chimps have a very straight spine from the base of the neck essentially to the sacrum, which is the bit where the spine connects to the pelvis. We have 2 curves. We have the secondary curve at the back of the neck, and we have the secondary curve, which is the lumbar curve. And that allows us to stand up straight and tall and do things that humans do. Chimps can't do that. If you ever watch, remember the tea commercials back in the days, there's the PG Tips. Chimps, when they stand up, they throw their arms back because they don't have that curve in the spines. In order to be able to balance to stand up, they have to throw their arms back. Chimps also can't lock their knees. Their knees are constantly in flexion no matter what they're doing. So they are sort of armored against the problems of knees and lower back that we humans have to deal with. We humans have also created a world where we can sit a lot. It's a very comfortable world in some ways. If we go back maybe even 200 years, sitting was something that humans did a lot less. And so certainly over the last 50 years, definitely over the last 10 years, we're sitting more and more. And the core gets weaker because it doesn't get to do the things that the core evolved to do. And the things that the core evolved to do are essentially everything that we do as humans, and we did for about 100,000 years before we started sitting in offices and driving around in cars. It's there to support us when we stand, when we walk, when we pick things up and carry things, whether that be food or infants. We throw things, whether that be spears or rocks or punches. And it's there to help us bend and reach for things. And it's funny how we've grown into a society where we don't move the core as much. And part of that is because we sit a lot. Part of that is because we aren't as mobile as we are, and we don't need to do things like throw spears and carry berries home as much. And so we have to do things to keep our core moving that maybe we wouldn't do otherwise. And yoga is one of those things. Yoga is a good way to keep the core moving. In terms of how much movement we have in the spine, we have quite a lot of movement in the spine. And you probably just thinking now about your spine in general, think, well, the neck has an enormous amount of movement. If I consider looking straight ahead, normal range of motion in the neck, you can go to the side to about 80 degrees. So almost kind of to that 90-degree point. You can almost go to the side, that's both sides. You can flex it forward 45 degrees and you could go back about 45 degrees. That's normal range of motion. Some people can go way beyond that. Some people have a lot less than that. So the neck moves a lot. And as we sort of get older, one of the things that we find is because we use the neck a lot more than the rest of the spine, we have things like growths on the spine. It can cause things like nerve impingements and problems like that. So it's a good thing to be able to move the rest of the spine and not be compensating with the neck so much. As for the rest of the spine, we have like 12 vertebrae down to the base of our sacrum, and that makes most of the movements that we do. And if you're sitting down now, what are the major movements that you've got? Well, you've got a forward bend. This one. You can play with that, feel what that feels like. That forward bend. Generally, people can go quite far on a forward bend, about 90 degrees before they start using the hips. So you can go quite far using all the spine. Then you can go back. I'm against the wall, but you can lean back and you can feel that. And you can go back about 30 degrees on leaning back. Some people can go a lot more, some people can go a lot less. Some people can go a lot more, but they're actually compensating in places. So we see a lot of people doing wheel and they're doing a lot of stuff in the shoulders and the back. Side to side, we have about 30 degrees again. So maybe if you're doing yoga a lot, you have a little bit more. Maybe if you sit a lot, you have a little bit less. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's all just kind of part of where we are. So we can start to explore this thing. The other thing that I want to kind of cover very quickly before we move on is sort of core and backache. There's this whole connection between if they have backache, people will tell them just strengthen your core. And I'm sort of wary of that. In part, having a strong core is a good thing, but it does not necessarily mean that you don't have backache, because there's a lot of things that can come into making backache that isn't related to the core. And if you think about it, it can be mobility restrictions. Maybe we're not moving right, so we're compensating more with the low back. It can be things like strength deficits. We're just basically not strong enough to do what we're doing. You can have a fear of movement. If you've had low back pain, that fear of movement comes into it. And it can be a very long process to get beyond that fear of movement. You can even have post-traumatic stress from an injury. And again, learning these movements in a slow way and feeling your body is a way to get into that in a way that is safe and not just push yourself. You'll feel better. It's not always that. And then there's a load of other things. Depression can affect our mobility. Anxiety can affect our mobility. Autoimmune disorders can be a problem there. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Poor diet, poor sleep, excessive worry and constant focus on pain is another one. And catastrophizing, the idea that if we do hurt our backs, that it's almost like it's a permanent injury. And so there's a lot more to this than just strengthening your core. Good core strength is good, but it's also, as part of rehabilitation, I would say that it's also good to have physios and doctors involved. And yoga teachers are not doctors or physiotherapists. Even though you get referred a lot to people from doctors who say yoga would be good for you, it's also very good to realize that depending on what you do, it can be quite variable. But having good core is not a bad thing. I don't think anybody has suffered from having good core strength, so we're going to kind of get into that. Let's play with core movement. So starting to sit comfortably. Enough of that lecture part. You know, I mean, I think the lectures are important. Last time I did this, people said, I wish you talk more. And it was like, okay, talk more. Let's have a think about what movements we have and maybe explore these ranges of movement quite slowly. So forward bending is one. And we can let the neck go down and we can come into a forward bend. Coming into just wherever feels comfortable. Again, you can use your hands to control that range of motion. Maybe playing in and out of that full range of motion. So you're going in and out a little bit. Noticing where that is. Noticing if there's any pain. I mean, and staying well beyond that place of pain. Then we can come back to upright and explore going back slightly. We don't go, again, 30 degrees back is not much. So we just explore, we're going bending the upper spine a little bit back. And the cue I like for this is this idea of lifting the collarbones up towards the ceiling. I'm going to do that gently, feeling what goes on. You might be able to feel your shoulder blades getting involved in here. We're going to come to the shoulder blades in a little bit. Feeling what feels like a nice range of motion. Are you somebody that likes to have the neck back? Or are you somebody that likes to have the neck in more of a neutral position? And then there's the side-to-side movements. Noticing that both sides are going to be different. And also, if you're sitting cross-legged, noticing that the sides are going to be different based upon how your legs are crossed. You might want to play with that. You might notice one way feels better than the other. And when you're side bending, it's good to keep the sit bones connected to the ground underneath you as well, so you can feel that you're connected. You're not lifting up to one side. That's not side bending. That's something completely different. And then we have rotation, twisting, going from one side to the other. And I said that when we rotate the neck, we can go about 80 degrees, which is almost to that 90-degree mark. So we're almost looking over the shoulder. If your spine can rotate without the neck about 35 degrees. So you can go around about 105 degrees. So you can just see behind you, sort of thing. And you'll notice, driving is one of the times you notice with this twist part, especially if you don't use your mirrors for reversing, that it becomes harder and harder to turn and look behind you as you're driving. And a part of that is this idea that we don't move in the thoracic as much. So playing with this gentle turning. I mean, you notice when people are reversing in cars, they generally have their hand on the other seat, they're yanking themselves over and all that. And that's not really good for your spine if you think about it. Oh, I was supposed to say good reversing cameras. But playing with this movement. There's also different ranges of movement, whether you're standing, whether you're sitting, and whether you're kneeling. If you're standing, you have much more twisting motion and back to front motion because you can put the ankles and the knees and the hips into play a lot more. So in the sitting position, it's the place that we're mostly confined the most. And that can be where there's a great potential for injury in things like twisting and forward bending, that we're confined in how much we can move, and only the spine can move. So we need to kind of be careful about that and realize that our range of motion when we're standing to when we're sitting is very different. You'll notice in yoga sometimes when we do a forward bend, when we're standing, I'll encourage, let's put our hands on the floor maybe and go all the way down and go all floppy. If we're sitting, it's a much lesser movement and it's much better to control it because there's lots less safety breaks in things like the knees and the hips to come into play. Then there's breathing, and we're going to play with breathing in a second. Somebody's just joined in, that's kind of cool. We're going to play with breathing now, and where we're going to play with breathing is that if you have a block, then we're going to need the block. If you don't have a block, you can have to use a shoe, you can use a rolled up mat, you can use a blanket, or whatever. So, if you don't have a block or anything else, then you can follow along anyway. Right, taking the block, lying on our back. And here you can choose, do you want to lie on your back with your knees bent or your legs straight? I would say go with your knees bent, because lying in this position here can feel like, for a bit can feel like it's hard on the low back. Notice what feels good in your low back and do that. Take the block, put it on your belly, roughly around where your belly button is. Feel the weight of that block, whether it's light, whether it's heavy, whether you're, whatever it is. Feel it on your belly. It's more of a feeling exercise, this. And then on the inhale, we're going to lift the belly up. We're going to lift that block up as high as it will go. And then on the exhale, we're going to pull that belly down. Now you might be able to look at your block. You might be able to just feel that block. Inhale, let the belly rise up.
exhale, the belly come down. Playing with sending as much breath into the belly as you can. As feels comfortable, anyway. And we're not doing this just so that we can get into breathing deeply because it's yoga, but that's part of it. But there's another thing at play here. It's something called intra-abdominal pressure. When we breathe in and the belly expands, we're sending pressure into the belly. We're not sending breath into the belly. It's the diaphragm pressing down on the contents of the belly. We're putting pressure into the belly, and that actually helps to support our spine from the inside. So breathing in as deeply as we can and lifting that belly up. We're sending pressure into the belly, and that's pressing against the inside of our spine. And it's actually acting as a support mechanism for our spine. Which is why being able to breathe in fully is an important thing. But it's also when we're breathing out, you'll notice that your belly muscles are starting to work, especially if you're pulling that block down lower than it normally wants to go. You're switching on your transverse abdominis muscles, and those are the muscles that support your core when you don't have breath in. So being able to switch from this full breath, where the intra-abdominal pressure is holding your spine up, to that exhale where essentially the core muscles are supporting your spine, is a good thing, which is why I talk a lot about breath in yoga. Feeling for that deep, deep breath. Another thing in yoga that you'll hear people talk about, especially when they're lying down on the back to do abs in yoga, there's two cues. One is called press it. One cue is to press the lower back ribs down. So imagine where your back of your ribs are on your back. So it's the upper back, just before you start getting into the lower back. You press that down into the mat. It's easier if you take a big breath in and then press the lower back down. So you're taking that curve out of the back. You'll feel your abs start to activate. It's actually your abs that are actually twisting the pelvis to get those lower back muscles pressed down. If you feel like, I don't feel like there's anything happening when you tell me to press my lower back ribs down. Another cue is to press your low back down into the mat. So some people say press the top rim of your sacrum down into the mat. It's good if you know where your sacrum is, but this idea of tilting the pelvis, you squashing your low back down into the mat, accomplishes the same thing, just a slightly different cue. So it's playing with this idea of pressing the low back into the mat, and you feel your abs kick on when you're doing that. Again, the reason we do that, especially when we're playing with abdominals, is that it helps to support the core, it helps to support the low back. So we're not just stressing the low back like we're doing sit-ups the whole time. The core is held quite tight. So playing with this idea now of pressing the low back into the mat, either through the cue of pressing the lower back ribs down, or pressing the low back down, or top rim of your sacrum, whichever one feels like it feels most appropriate here. And you feel your pelvis twist upright. So if you had a tailbone, you're tucking your tailbone under and your low back is pressing down just a little bit. Some people will have a lot of motion in this, some people will have very little motion. It's fine. But you feel your abs switch on when you're doing that. And if you have backache, if you have sciatica, this is probably one of the most easiest, most non-invasive things that you can do to help that. This idea of pressing the low back down and then letting it go, pressing it low back down again and letting it go.
Everybody feel like they've got that bit going. Cool. Let's play with cat-cow and seated cat-cow. Two different things. Let's move into a cat-cow position. So cat-cow is on your hands and knees. First thing people always say to me, my knees don't like being like this. So I would say pad the knees. Other ones is my hands don't like being on the floor. And an option for that is that you can have your hands on blocks as well, so that the fingers are down, so there's not as much stress on your wrists. So we come down into cat-cow position for the starting tabletop position. The back about as straight as you feel like it can be. So we're not going into the cow position where we're sinking our bellies down, and we're not going into the cat position where we're lifting our back up. It's reasonable flat back position. And this is what our abs are essentially supposed to do. It keeps us in this flat back position. You can, if you stayed here long enough, you would feel your abs start to kick in. So this is what we start to do. So cat-cow, we move from taking a big breath in, which takes that intra-abdominal pressure into play, and we let the belly hang down. Tailbone goes up, head goes up a little bit. We don't want it to go up too high. Exhale, gently pull the belly in. Let the head come down and the tailbone tuck under the pelvis. Inhale, let the belly hang down. Head comes up. Tailbone goes up as well. Exhale. Go through this movement a few more times, feeling like you're getting as much movement through each of the vertebrae as you can. There's this whole thing I see people doing cat-cow where it's like it's going super fast and it's like some kind of, I don't know, it's like a disco move. And the idea is to go as slow as you can and getting as much movement in each of the vertebrae as you can. And also this transition with the breath. It's the same thing that we were practicing with the block, from this idea of the belly being full, where we're sinking the belly down, so the belly's full, there's intra-abdominal pressure in there, so we're protecting the low back from going too far. And then when we inhale, when we exhale, we're pulling the belly in and supporting the low back with the muscles. So there's this transition from the breath supporting the low back to the muscles holding the supporting the low back. So do a couple more, getting a feeling for this movement, seeing what it feels like. And then we're going to come back up to a seated position and play with seated cat-cow and see what that feels, why that feels different, and why this is also a nice move to play with. Cross-legged is the way. Yeah, the toilets are open. Should have said that at the beginning.
That's good to know.
It's good to know, yeah, from this coronavirus times, especially when we're working with abs. That's another thing as well. This intra-abdominal pressure is, again, because we're not used to it, or maybe we, if we're not used to it, certainly it can cause you to want to go to the toilet. So if at any point anybody wants to go to the toilet, feel free, don't need to ask. Cat-cow seated. We're now moving in the same position, but in this upright position, which changes the way gravity is pulling on us. And I like this movement a little bit better because it's a little bit more controlled. So I like to bring my hands onto my knees. Inhale, I pull my chest through, my arms. Let the head go back a little bit, let the tailbone curl up a little bit. Exhale, push the hands back, push the chest back, arching the back, let the head come down, pulling that belly in. Inhale, pulling forward. Exhale, going back. And a few more of these. The reason I like these is because if you feel like you want to get some movement in your back during the day, it's a lot easier to do this than it is to go on all fours and start to do cat-cows. That part of it is because this movement is much more accessible. Another reason I like this is because we can start to add little twists to it. We'll talk about that in a second. Just for now, just getting this idea of moving the pelvis, and you can feel as you're rocking on your sit bones from going forwards and going back, that your pelvis is moving slightly. Some people, again, the pelvic movement is going to be big. For other people, the pelvic movement is going to be slow. It's going to be small. Again, it doesn't matter so much. We're just playing within the movements that we have. Rocking back and forth. Going with the breath here. So as you go back, you exhale and pull that belly in. It's the ab muscles that are supporting the low back at this point. And when we're coming forward, we're breathing in, creating some intra-abdominal pressure, supporting the low back. We can also add twists to this. And the way I like to add twists is I bring both hands onto one knee, turn the chest towards that knee as much as you feel it wants to go. Not forcing anything, just keeping it, and then doing cat-cows towards that knee and away from that knee. So we're bringing flexion and extension into the spine in a twisted state, but it's unloaded. So we're not adding any weight to it. Feeling again for what your range of motion is in this position. It will be different. And coming back to the other side, doing a few on the other side. Maybe changing the cross of your legs if you feel like, wow, that feels really super tight on one side, but it feels easier on the others. Maybe changing the cross of the legs helps. If you were super precise, you'd do a certain number with your legs crossed one way and a certain number with legs crossed the other way on both sides. I'm not super precise.
Is it normal in this position, Adrian, to feel like you're not getting as much breath?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're in this twist position, your obliques are pulling across the body on like this, and that's actually limiting how much your rib cage can move. You can practice it, that you can be in this twisted position and learn to get much deeper breath in. Hence this idea, sometimes I'll say things like breathe into the side ribs or breathe into the back ribs, because you're helping to get movement into that area. But absolutely, anytime you're in a twist or flexion or extension, you're compressing the amount of air that you can get in by quite a lot at times. So good spot. Yeah, so the question in the room was that, is it when you're in a twist, is it normal to feel like you're getting less breath in? And absolutely, when you're in any position other than neutral, you'll feel that. So good spot to that, and this is why we cue things like breathing into different parts of the body or relaxing parts of the body to help get more of that breath in. Awesome. I think we should stand up now, and we're going to stand up and we're going to play with breath. If you have a wall at home, this is where having a wall becomes kind of fun. Everybody here has clear walls mostly. You can always kind of move to a spot with a clear wall as well. But let's start off. Moving on with junk. I feel like I'm going to set that off. So, first off, standing in kind of this position in yoga, we would call it mountain pose. Arms down, breathing. And people, you see sometimes they want to be almost like mountains, not moving. But the breath, you'll notice that there's movement in the body. As you inhale, generally for people, the belly goes out and there's a leaning back to accommodate for that belly moving out. And then as you breathe out, as the belly comes in, because there's a contraction around the core, we're shortening on the front and coming forward slightly. So there's noticing this. Noting also that we think of breathing being done by the diaphragm, which is this massive muscle underneath the rib cage, and then as we breathe in, it pulls down, which puts pressure on the stomach, and when we breathe out, it comes up. But also noticing that there's loads of other muscles that come into play. You might notice when you're just in standing position here that your butt muscles are moving, which is quite normal. They're not even to do with breath, but they're in that place where because we're moving, They come into play. There's also serratus anterior plate, which is the muscle that connects from the ribs to the scapula, to the shoulder blade. That moves. So you might even feel your arms moving slightly. On the inhale, your elbows will roll in gently. On the exhale, the elbows will roll out gently. And there's loads of other things. There's a lifting of the rib cage. There's movement in your knees, movement in your ankles. So this breath isn't just something that happens in here. It travels and waves through the whole body. How to activate the core. This is one of the questions that gets asked a lot in yoga. How do I switch on? When somebody says switch on your core, what are you doing? And people think automatically when you say switch on the core, the first thing they do is they pull their belly in, like they're holding for a punch or something. This idea of holding the belly in. And that's not how it works. And it's very subtle the way that the core kicks in the human body. Part of it is to do with breath. And we're going to explore breath. And then we're going to explore when the foot strikes the floor. Actually, the core switches on when you're walking. First off, we're going to play with breath. And the way to play with this is to take your hand and put your hand on the belly. And feel when you exhale gently that you feel this front body shorten slightly. So you're feeling like this bit is coming down and this bit comes up. And then when you breathe in, there's a lengthening across the front body. Exhale, contraction across the front body. If you were to say to me, what's the fastest, best way to activate your core? I would say, imagine that you're hurrying a mirror. Like, that action there turns on your core. For some people that feels weird to me, that's just in my mouth. So what I cue then is, imagine it's like 2 days after Boxing Day and you're putting on your jeans and you're like sucking in just a little bit. It's just been Christmas and you're just pulling in. That little tight pulling in, that subtle pulling in of the belly to take your trousers on, to do the button up, is also switching on the core. It's not when we go too far or when we're like, we're really pulling the belly in like we might do in Uddiyana or something, because you can't maintain that. And the core actually at that point doesn't really support the spine at that point. It's this very gentle action. If you used to like CrossFit or kettlebells, you'll feel that there's all this different breathing patterns. So if you're pulling a kettlebell up, you'll exhale there, up there, when it comes down. And then you exhale, and then inhale as it comes up, and then exhale again. So there's all these very complicated ways of switching on the core. But that helps to switch on the core. And that also protects your low back. So this idea of exhale to switch on the core protects the low back. And we're going to now play with something using a wall. So if you have a wall, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stand in front of a wall, quite close, easily sort of like, I'm maybe 1.5 foot away from this wall here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my weight into my hands and almost like take the weight in my hands here. So I'm leaning into the wall. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and come up. Now you should feel that if you're not too far away from the wall, if you go, you're lifting up without pressing through your arms. Estelle, if you stay a little bit closer to the wall, try it now. Lean into the wall and go. Do you feel yourself floating up?
Feel my belly pulling up.
Feel your belly pulling up?
Yeah. Switch
on your shoulders. Feel for pressing into the wall with your hands and then go. And you'll float up. Anybody else feeling that? Yeah. It's a very subtle movement. It's not like you're flying back across the room or something. So this is a great place if you think of like when you're in chaturanga in yoga and you're holding your weight and you're coming down. That breathing out that you're doing is actually helping to keep the core extended. What's lifting you up when you're pressing against the wall and you're going, is your core switching on just a little bit and you just butterfly floating up. It's really weird. It's a really weird move. But it's very gentle. Exhale up and you float up slightly.
This is why I cue in yoga in the side bend, say reverse warrior. I will always say take a big breath in, exhale, come out of it, because it switches on the core. Some yoga styles say breathe in to come out. I will always cue on the exhale because I think it supports your core a bit better. A lot of it depends on kind of like your background. I used to do a lot of weightlifting when I in my youth, well, not just my youth, but sort of like this idea of exhaling on a pull or on a coming out of the core supports your core. Certainly being aware of that if you're on empty and you're trying to come out of this as a side bend or a warrior two, you're having to do a lot more core work. Whether if you're full of breath and you're exhaling, it's much easier to come out. We'll play with that later, but this idea of exhaling to switch on the core. The other thing that the core switches on is when I'm doing this, or when everybody does this, the heel hits the floor. Automatically, core switches on. Heel straight, core switches on. So when we're walking around, our core is switching on when we're walking. Especially if we heel strike. It doesn't do it if, like when I was a kid, I used to run on the tiptoe. It doesn't do it when you're doing that. Which is why if you're running and you've got like shoes that actually, runners are big into heel strike, aren't they? With like trainers and all this kind of stuff. Which is why you actually want the heel to strike down. You strike the heel, strike the heel, strike the heel.
Is that because it's connected to your glutes?
It's actually because it's connected to your pelvic muscles. Yeah. It's the pelvic muscles that switch on at that point, and that boom. It's just that boom, boom when we're doing it. And that's another time when we're doing it. It's why walking is such a great thing, and why we evolved to walk on upright, on legs extended. So unlike chimps, we're not walking like this the whole time, which is like, God, that must be a lot of work. We evolved into this upright position with locking knees, but when we do this, the core comes on to support our lower back. That's why. Which is why walking is another great exercise. And if you have shoes that don't make you do this heel strike thing, high heels, I presume. I never worn high heels. Yeah, you can't heel strike those, can you? But your core isn't working. And so having shoes that let you go boom, off, or no shoes at all, like in yoga, where we're actually striking the heel down, is a great way to switch on the core. Every step you're taking is a little ab workout. Right. And so you can think about this when you're in something like coming into like a warrior one, especially if you're stepping into a warrior one or stepping out of it, you can feel for pressing into that heel. And then the other foot, let the heel come down and down. So you're stepping in, you can feel for this heel strike. Switches on your core, protects your core. Quadruped. Quadruped is an exercise that they teach in yoga for prenatal and postnatal yoga. And it's actually a way of getting ab strength in place. Without having to do things like anything that involves this flexion in the body. It's incredibly good at activating the core, because when we were on all fours, this is what the core was for. So let's play with quadruped. For quadruped, we're on all fours again. Hands under the shoulders, knees under your hips. Generally, that's a kind of a good place to be. If you want to make quadruped a little bit harder, you can bring your hands a little bit further forward. That makes it a little bit harder, puts a little bit more stress on the shoulders too, so you might not want to do that. Stage one of quadruped is to take a big breath in, keep your back flat if possible. Exhale, press your hands into the mat. Feel for your belly lifting up. So it's a little bit like cat-cow, but the back isn't moving. Inhale, relax the belly, keep pressing your hands down into the mat. Exhale, gently pull the belly in. Feel for pressing your hands down into the mat. Feel how when you're pressing your hands down into the mat, your core also switches on. It's kind of interesting. But we can take quadruped into much more fun territory than just sitting there all stable. Hand lifts is the next one we do. So you take a big breath in, then you gently turn your chest towards, say, your right hand. So gently turn the chest towards the right hand, hold the breath, exhale, lift your left hand up off the floor. Just about an inch. Inhale, hands come back down onto the floor. Hold the breath, turn your chest towards the left arm. Gently lift your other hand up. Exhale, bring that hand down. Feel the core activating as you're doing this. It's kind of really interesting, isn't it? This very small movement. Big breath in again. Turn the chest in one direction, so towards my right arm here. Lift the left hand up, and then exhale, bring that hand down. Come back to the middle. Inhale. Chest towards the other hand. Lift the opposite hand up, and then exhale, bring that hand down. This is an action of the core in stabilizing this twisting movement. In sports, one of the easiest ways to get injured is to be forced into some kind of twist and you're not really aware of it. Usually they'll go down to the knees or it'll go down to your lower back. This idea of activating the core so that you can resist this twisting against gravity, great way of protecting the lower back. You can also jazz up quadruped in the same way that when you lift one hand up, you lift the opposite knee up. Has to be the opposite knee. If you try and do it with the same knee, you'll fall over. We've tried it in yoga, in class. So you turn to one side, lift the hand up, and opposite knee. It only needs to be an inch or so. You're feeling your core resisting that twisting action. You got 2 points of contact on the floor and the rest of it is going through your core to keep you A, stable, B, upright. If you want to add a little bit more loading to this, and I would say with this, play it very carefully. It's very easy to start loading these exercises too quickly and the benefits of them sort of slows up. But the one way to load this is that instead of just lifting the hand up, you can actually straighten the arm, which sort of gets into the shoulders, turns this into a sort of a dual action thing. You could also do it that when you're lifting the hand and the knee up, that you're straightening the hand and the leg. This one can be quite tight on the low back sometimes, and so a down level for this is to straighten the other leg but keep the toes on the floor in this sort of position. So you're still straightening the leg out, but you're keeping the toes on the floor, so you're not taking the whole weight of your leg on your low back. Again, it's playing with this in a very progressive way. Finish that one for a second. And then, what should we do? Let's play with internal and external obliques. Before we get any further, obliques. So there's a lot of, if we have like a board up here, I'd show you all the different kinds of abs. So you've got the transverse abdominis, which is the underlying muscle, which is abs that go, very thin wall muscle goes all the way around. Then we've got at the front, that's 6-pack or 8-pack or whatever pack abs that we think of at the front. And its main purpose of that is to stop our low back caving out, not to put us into any kind of crunch position. But then we've also got these muscles that run across the body like this and also down the side. So we've got external obliques that go down the side, internal obliques that cross in the middle. And they give us this twisting and side bending pushing. We're going to play with those. And to play with those, we're going to start off with a move that doesn't need a block, and then jazz it up to one that does need a block. So if you have a block, have it handy. If you don't have a block, then you can just block. So We've probably done these a million times in classes anyway, if you've been here before. If you haven't been here before, this is completely new, so you listen to the cues. If listening to cues doesn't, if you're more of a visual person, you might just want to watch and then try them out. I'll give plenty of opportunities. First off, we're going to work on the external obliques. Take a big breath in. Hold the breath, press your bottom back ribs down. Exhale, left knee comes up towards the chest, pulling that belly down. Leave the knee where it is, take another big breath in. Now left hand goes onto left thigh. This is where it's important. Same hand as the knee that's up. Press the hand to the thigh, thigh into the hand. Exhale, pull that belly down. External obliques, here, the obliques on the outside of our bodies. Inhale, let the knee come down to the floor, bring the hand down to the floor. Hold the breath, press bottom back ribs down again. Exhale, right knee comes up towards the chest, pull that belly down. Right hand onto right thigh, big breath in. Press hand to thigh, thigh to hand, exhale, pull that belly down. Inhale, hands to the floor. I'll cue one more round of these. Hold the breath, press bottom back ribs down. Exhale, left knee comes up towards the chest, pulling that belly down. Leave the knee where it is, take a big breath in again. Left hand onto left thigh, press hand to thigh, thigh to hand, exhale, pull that belly down. Inhale, limbs to the floor. Hold the breath, press your bottom back ribs down. Exhale, right knee comes up towards the chest, pulling that belly down. Knee stays where it is, big breath in. Right hand onto right thigh, press hand to thigh, thigh to hand, exhale, pull that belly down. Inhale, bring your feet back down to the floor. Do a few more rounds.
It's a very small movement, it's a very subtle movement. Can you feel those muscles on the outside of the belly contracting when you're pressing the hand into the thigh, thigh to the hand? That's the main thing that we're looking for with that one.
I can't feel it.
You can't feel it. Well, that's maybe because you've done CrossFit, haven't you?
Yeah.
You might go strong abs. You know, we'll move on to the next thing. Finish off the round that you're on. And then the next one we're going to play with is internal obliques. The internal obliques go diagonally across the body, so from one corner to the other. We can get into those pretty much the same way. Same but different. So, take a big breath in. Hold the breath, press your bottom back ribs down. Exhale, left knee comes up towards the chest, pulling that belly down. Leave the knee where it is, take a big breath in. This time, right hand goes onto left thigh. Press hand to thigh, thigh to hand. Exhale, pull that belly down. Inhale, bring your limbs to the floor. Hold the breath, press your bottom back ribs down again. Exhale, right knee comes up towards the chest, pulling that belly down. Big breath in, left hand onto right thigh. Press hand into thigh, thigh into hand, exhale, pull that belly down. Inhale, let your limbs come to the floor. Do a few more rounds of this. Feeling for that contraction across the body. Again, you might feel it, you might not feel it. It sort of doesn't, you know, it's working it even if you're not feeling it. Because that action of pressing the hand into the thigh, thigh into hand, it's generated by the obliques. So you're feeling it either way. It's happening either way. If you're not feeling it, then maybe your core is quite strong. And so that's a good thing. Doing a couple more rounds of that one. Feeling it, or at least working it. Feeling that connection also between the leg moving and the abs, and also that contraction that you're feeling or generating when you're pressing the hand into the thigh. Finish off that round that you're on, and then maybe let the limbs just gently parachute onto the mat. Maybe give them a little bit of a wiggle from side to side. Feeling for kind of getting into those areas that might have been working. Next
thing we're going to do is we're going to work on, from this position, the serratus anterior muscle. Serratus anterior muscle is that muscle that connects between our ribs and our shoulder blades. And it's one of those important muscles for core strength in the upper part of the torso. It also moves the shoulder blades, and a lot of us don't have an awful lot of shoulder blade movement. It's also, ironically, one of the first muscles in the body that we get conscious control over as babies, because it helps us reach our arms up. So lying down on the floor, reach your arms up. So imagine that you're reaching for a favorite toy or just something that you can see. As you're reaching those arms up and reaching up with those hands, you're activating your serratus anterior muscle. Notice that there's a lot of movement in your shoulders, that you can bring your shoulders down without moving anything to the shoulders, and your arms get shorter essentially. As you reach up, your arms get longer. All that movement is happening in the shoulder blades. And it's what babies do. It's this reaching that they do. They reach, they crawl. So let's play with this crawling motion. Right, how are we going to do that? This is where you need the block. Again, if you're a visual person, you might want to stand up, or sit up and watch what I'm doing here. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that block, I'm going to lift my left knee up off the floor, and I'm going to put the block on my knee, and then I'm going to put my forearm on the block. Like so. In here, you're going to feel the external oblique switch on, your serratus anterior is switching on. Take a long breath in. Hold the breath. Press the forearm into the block, block into the forearm. Exhale, pull that belly down. Long breath in, keep that block clamped in there. Hold the breath, press block into the forearm, forearm into the block. Exhale, pull that belly down. Let's do 2 more. Big breath in. Press block into forearm, forearm into block. Exhale, pull that belly down. 1 more at your own time. Swap the block over to the other side, and we'll do 4 on the other side. Clamping the block between your forearm. Big breath in. Squeeze forearm into block, block into forearm. Exhale, pull that belly down. Big breath in, keep that block clamped in place. Hold the breath, squeeze forearm into block, block into forearm, exhale, pull that belly down. Do 2 more. And then move that block away. Give your knees a bit of a wobble from side to side. Maybe roll up onto your favorite side. And we'll come up quickly to a seated position just to have a quick talk about that. Did you feel that one?
A little bit.
Little bit. What we're doing with that one is when we're babies and we move into this crawling position. It emulates this crawling position that we're doing. First thing, bring the knee down, which activates the core. Now again, if you've got quite strong core through lifting and all this kind of stuff, you might not feel like my core switching on, but this action of pressing, it's working into that area. And it's helping to strengthen the core. Again, in a way that isn't really overly loaded, because you can choose how much you're pressing in with one thing or the other. Let's, before we do anything else, we've done a lot of core for a little bit. Let's just think about the shoulder blades. Because as much as kind of like if in a few weeks I'm doing this again, well, I'll be doing shoulders and I'll be doing hips. We'll be kind of covering a little bit of ground. I think it's kind of cool to kind of like get a little bit of, get onto, at least onto the vocabulary. Your shoulder blades can move in essentially 6 directions. The shoulder blades can move up the back, and that happens when we lift our arms up. They can move down the back when we bring our arms down. So the shoulder blades are moving as we're doing that. We can also do upward rotation of the shoulder blades as well. And for that, when we bring our arms up through the side like this, they're going up and they're pinching down. So the shoulder blades are moving in this direction. We're doing that. So you've got the up and down, which you can think of as that. And you've got that rotation up and down, you think of that one. There's also another one, and this is this forwards and back, or protraction and retraction. In yoga, when we're doing shoulder shrugs, I usually cue that squeezing the bottom middles of your shoulder blades together. That's retraction. There's also the opposite of that, which is protraction. And the cue for that, you'll when people say, wrap your shoulder blades around. And that's what we're doing. So if you think of holding your arms out in front, think of squeezing the shoulder blades together. That's retraction. The opposite of that is protraction. We're pushing our hands forward and letting the shoulder blades come, boom. So the shoulders come together, shoulders move apart. Shoulders come together, shoulders move apart. This idea here. I'm noticing how much movement you feel you have in your shoulder blades. For subtlety purposes, if you're feeling like, 2 shoulder blades moving, you can do these in one direction at a time. So you sort of like, how much movement have I got in this? Surprisingly, people have quite a little movement in their shoulder blades. It's very interesting. And the problem then becomes is that everything happens in the shoulder joint. And this glenohumeral joint tends to take all the movement in the shoulders at that point. Which is why I pretty much do shoulder shrugs in every class. Not because it's the only thing I can remember to do, but it's because one of the things we can really benefit from is getting the shoulder blades moving properly. It's one of those areas for shoulder health that is superb. It also comes into abs. From when we were in cat-cow, chances are you went from when you're sinking your belly in, retraction, to protraction as you're pushing the belly up. So this is, again, the shoulder blades are moving in that position. And also when we were doing seated cat-cow, doing the same thing. So again, shoulder blade movement into there, even if you don't think that that's to do with shoulder blades. So we're getting a lot of shoulder blade stuff. The classic ab exercise outside of yoga is plank. Everybody sort of like thinks plank is great for your core, and it is. But generally, you say plank to people who aren't going to the gym, and the first thing they think of is that they were made to do plank at some point, and they go, "Oh my God, this is bad for my back." Like this sucks. For whatever reason, it just sucks, and it does suck because if you don't have the strength to do a plank, things like your low back suffers, and that's not fun. And so there's ways of progressing into plank where you're totally in control of it and there's no risk to the low back. So we're going to play with plank a little bit now. With this, because you need to feel into your own back. If you feel like, God, all I want to do is just watch this, that's fine too. But I'm putting this in because it's the classic move. People ask me about it all the time. There is plank in yoga when we're doing, especially because we're doing sun salutations. And if you're not aware of it, it's the time when I see people do things and it's like, and you might not notice that I don't teach sun salutations that much. And that's probably why. Because I noticed that like plank is the point with people, I do stuff and it's like, it's very hard to fix. So we're going to play with plank. And the easiest way to start off in plank is what we were doing before in tabletop position. So you start off with your hands under your shoulders and your hips under your knees, and you're pressing into the ground, and your abs are activated here. This is what because if your abs weren't switched on, you'd be doing that cow position like that. Your abs are switched on. To come into plank a little bit deeper, you can bring your hands a little bit further forward, and then bring your shoulders so they're over the wrists, or closer to over the wrists, depending on how far forward you're coming. And you've still got your knees down. Have you noticed that? You've still got the knees down here. So you keep your abs activated. Think about that movement. Switch on the abs. And you're staying in this position. And you might just want to breathe in this position because after a few breaths you may feel like, boy, yeah, I can start to feel my abs. And this is safe to come out of because you can come out of this quite easily by pushing your hips back into almost a child's pose position, and the low back doesn't suffer. And that's kind of like a cool thing, because yeah, we don't want to kind of do our low back in. So you might feel like, yeah, leaning forward a little bit into this mini plank position kind of works quite nicely for me. I kind of like this. This works quite nice. You might decide you want to go a little bit further forward, so the hands go a little bit further forward. You're sinking the hips down, you're straightening the back a little bit more. This is where you want to be careful that you don't let the low back sink down, so it becomes it's almost like this Sphinx pose position where the hips are sunk, or it doesn't turn into like a mini downward facing dog. The back needs to be pretty straight. And then you can push your hips back again and you can come out of that, and it feels like kind of quite cool. I want to come out of it for a second, just give yourself a little bit of a... And this is a good point to assess. How did your low back feel from there? Are you okay with that? Good. We can move into a bigger plank version. The plank in yoga we do with arms straight, we lower down. We're going to play with the lowering down. We'll play with arm straight plank next. So, if you think about what you're doing in yoga, you bring your arms down onto the floor, hands under the hips, and you can bring one leg back, the other leg back, and you're in this plank position. Your hands are over your shoulders, your legs are straight, your toes are down. If this is too much, the nice thing about this is you can bring your knees down, and you can also send your hips back again. So it's kind of safe. It's quite a safe position. But I do notice two things that we want to avoid in here. First and foremost is this sinking the low back in. And it turns into almost like a kind of an up dog kind of position in people's low backs. And then the other one we want to try and avoid, because it doesn't do anything, is a mini downward facing dog where the butt is up in the air in this position. So you want to be in kind of like the middle position where you're feeling like your abs are switched on, your butt's switched on, your thighs, your quads are switched on, your calves are switched on, your chest muscles switched on, you're pressing into the ground, you're protracting the shoulder blades, and then to come out, the knees can come down, and you can either lower down, or you can just send your hips back. How did that feel? That felt good, didn't it? Then there's the kind of, the way we make plank harder is to come down onto the forearms. So kind of like the same way again. You would think that like being down on the forearms would make it easier because it's like, it's not as far away, but it's actually harder because you're closer to being level. So, forearm position, bring the forearms down onto the floor. Either you can have the forearms straight, again think dolphin, or you can bring the forearms together and hold the hands. Kick the feet back. Squeeze the butt muscles, squeeze your abs, think about that. And with this, you can either come in by bringing the knees down and sort of shuffling back, or you can do that ungraceful thing of just kind of coming down all the way like that. How was that? That's a good plank there, Kelly.
Actually, for me, that's easy. That's a dodgy wrist. So.
That's easier for you to do that way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're feeling that one. Some things with plank to be aware of as well. I see people do this meerkat thing when they're looking around. And I know that's kind of a thing in yoga because like, there's so much stuff going on and you don't want to miss stuff. It's better to keep the head in a sort of a neutral position, not flopped all the way down, but just sort of active. So that's plank for you.
Can I just ask it?
Yeah.
If you've got, because I've got rotator cuff injuries, is it best to keep your arms parallel and not bring them in?
Yeah.
Or just keep them
It's best, you know that dolphin position? So a question's been asked in the room. With rotator cuff issues in the shoulder, what's the best, essentially what the best arm distance is?
Yeah.
The best arm distance is essentially what we would do in dolphin, where we clasp the arms together and keep them in that position, which generally brings them into quite a under your shoulders position. For some people have different sized arms. For me, clasping my biceps brings them too close together. So I tend to just have my fingers in the middle, but that's kind of knowing that works for me. But yeah, generally you don't want to be too wide, you don't want them to be too narrow. If they're too wide, they're definitely putting, there you go, that's pretty smart. So there's lots of different things.
Plank being the classic thing. I would say if you could hold a plank for a minute, pretty good. You know, probably from a plank perspective, you're not gaining much more from doing 2 minutes. Other than endurance, it's kind of fun, but if you can do a minute of plank, that's kind of good. If you're starting out, 10 seconds probably feels like a minute, or 10 minutes. But you know, it's a great exercise. You can get out of bed in the morning, you can do a plank, and you can like feel like, oh, my core's quite switched on. And quite honestly, when I was lifting quite heavy weights. My best lift was over 1,000 pound lift, so a rack pull. And when I did plank, my lifts got so much better, my backache diminished. And I'm one of those people, you probably know, go to the gym, don't do any warm up, just lift. And planks helped a lot. But planks work that kind of front part of the body. What about the side part of the body? Well, you can do a side plank too. We're going to play with side plank progression right now. Again, this is one to take slow. Not to go straight into like a full side plank and hey, look at me, because it can be kind of quite horrible. Yeah, horrible is a perfect word for it. So there's all these different progressions, and I'm going to show you kind of like the progressions here. For this, you're going to lie down on the mat, lie down on your side. And the easiest start place for plank is this, having your elbow down on the floor position here. And you're just lifting and lowering the side ribs down. So you're just playing with this idea of lying on the side and lifting this part up and letting that part go down. And plank position is where you're about halfway from fully lifted to down. So you think of your spine being quite straight, elbow pressing down into the mat, and you're holding that side position. Again, maybe 10 seconds is probably like enough. To come out of this, I always bring my knees in to roll over into the other side. This isn't one of those ones I would say definitely you want to do both sides. So find that position between the curve of the back being curved towards the floor and being lifted from the floor. You want that halfway position. And you're in that position. Your shoulder and your hips are roughly in line. If you want to get really pedantic, your crown of your head and your shoulders and your hips and your heels are in line, but yeah, kind of like to think about. As long as your kind of shoulders and your hips are roughly in line, you're doing pretty good. And you can feel that side, those side obliques switching on again. If you want to take this further, we're going to balance from the knees to the shoulders this time. So lying down on your side again, get your knees and your shoulders in line, and then you lift your hips up off the floor so that you're in line. And for this, you want your chest to be in line, so that this shoulder's pointing up towards the ceiling. You can have your arms up if that feels good, you can have your arm down, but you can feel those muscles along here and along here, switching on to keep your hips up off the ground. To come down, you bring your hips down, knees in, rotate to the other side, do the same on the other side. So this time you've got your shoulders and your knees in a line. If you're being pedantic, you can think of crown of your head, shoulders, knees in line, and the hips are being lifted up off the floor. And you're breathing as you're doing this, so you're transitioning from that point where you're on an inhale and you've got that intra-abdominal pressure, and that exhale where the muscles are contracting. And it's that handoff between one and the other. And come out, hips come down, knees come in. Then there's the full version of the side plank, where your heels and your shoulders in line. And then you lift your hips up, and so you're in a straight line. And then the other arm can come up. Or some people like that with a straight arm. I don't like that so much. I'm just going to do that. There we go. Because I find that one gets in the shoulder a bit too much for me. And you feel whichever one works best for you. Do the other side. How that one feel?
Yeah, I feel like I'm taking all the
weighted.
on my legs.
Yeah.
Is that right or wrong?
You know, that's the amazing thing about the human body, is that you put it in a position that it's not used to being in. And the first thing that it does is it compensates. If you're not strong enough, and that's fine. But then you're just in it for a few seconds. And your body will learn where it needs to be. So the full version again, the elbow.
See, I feel it in my shoulder.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Whoever invented this is a sadist.
I was just told whoever invented this is a sadist. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you.
It's awful.
Ah. Should we stand up to all that plank stuff? It's quite intense, isn't it? But this is the thing with abs, is that sort of abs become sort of intense. Yeah. And you also kind of realise because when we're standing and we're doing things like, oh look, there's a penny and we're leaning towards it, we don't kind of realise just how much the core works. Until we're doing something like that, and you're like, whoa, that's a lot of core work. Yeah. While we're just standing and just kind of chilling for a bit, getting our breath kind of thing, the other thing that I get asked a lot about is sciatica. Sciatica seems to be something that maybe is because we're sitting a lot and has a lot of different things. I have a very small toolkit of things that I offer, and I'll kind of like introduce a couple of things towards the end of sciatica that work quite well. But it's weird how sciatica can have so many different causes. One person I knew had sciatica for years, and they stopped driving a Volvo, and they were like, oh, my sciatica went. It was clearly just the shape of the seat causing it. They moved on to a different car, and they were like, my sciatica gone. You know, and it can be so many different things. I've heard even things like men having wallets and sitting on their wallet the whole time. It does compress the sciatica nerve. It's not a cool thing to be doing. And so sciatica has this kind of huge amount of different things. A lot of people come to yoga with sciatica. So what can you do about sciatica? Well, one of the things I like to play with is getting into the glute muscles and getting into the piriformis muscles. Wish we had like charts we could get all kind of like geeky about where muscles are. But essentially, if you think of your butt muscles, you've got a lot of muscles in there. There's two muscles that can contract on a nerve. And there's all these different ways we can get into that muscle while also working the abs. And one of those is knee raises. And knee raises are simple. You just move your weight onto one leg and then lift the other knee up. And you'll feel your abs start to contract. Your abs are also working to keep you upright. And then we bring that leg down onto the floor and swap over. Heel straight down, abs contract, and move over to the other side. Right here. And also we're playing with balance here, which is like, you know, that a lot of achievements for Saturdays, right? But this is also working the abs. It's working the hip flexors, it's working the core, it's working everything for balance, so everything from the toes of your feet to the crown of your head is firing on to keep you going. Knee raises are another great way to work the abs. This is an easy version of a knee raise. If you want to make knee raises harder, trickier, whatever you think of, you can sit down on the floor. Like this. And the easiest progression of this is to bring your hands behind your back and then try and lift your leg. You're like, oh, my leg feels heavy. And you work the other one. It's like, yeah. Yeah. Because that makes it a little bit easier. Does it make it easier or harder? I don't know. There you go. Then you can bring your hands so they're in line with your hips. And try the same thing. Like, ooh, that gets good now. Quad muscles. And then you can bring your hands so they're a little bit further forward. And then a little bit further forward. And if you want to get really fancy, you can get a yoga block and put it between your legs. They can't see the yoga block. I'm going to have to lean back a bit. There we go. You put yoga block between your legs and you lift your leg over. Like that.
Leaning back.
Well, it depends how far you want to go, yeah. This is a big yoga block, so leaning back a little bit. So leaning back, your leg over.
So does it get harder as you
lean forward.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, it doesn't. I think it's harder to lean forward. You'll feel that. People feel this in different places. One of the main places they feel it is in the quad muscle here.
Yeah.
The vastus medialatus in there. But also it works the core. And the funny thing is that we don't feel in the core so much because we're used to this leg movements doing it. But this is a fun exercise. You don't have to have the block so high. I'm having it so high for the people at home. See that block?
No, I like it.
It's fun, isn't it? And if you come all forwards, it's like, whoa, yeah. And this is also, if you're feeling it in the quads, why quad muscles are so important if you want to do things like a pike position to pull yourself forward. Because these quad muscles are actually helping to rotate the pelvis for you to be able to come forward. And you're feeling it with this. This is a great exercise to play with. I would say, if you want to challenge, kids are being noisy and you want to give them something to do, come do this. I mean, it's a great exercise. It strengthens the quads. It's great for knee injury prevention because you're flexing the feet, you're flexing the muscles of the front of the leg. It's a great way to exercise the knee with no pressure at all on the knee. So that's a fun one to play with. But when you bend your knees again, you're like, oh God, my quads. And so we've done that. Next thing, just now we're going to play with downward facing dog, but with a little bit of a variation on it for core exercise. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you first and then you can play with it. If you think of the normal downward facing dog, it does have nothing to do with your core whatsoever. Well, it does, but you don't really feel it. You're in downward facing dog, but most of the time in downward facing dog, people are thinking about like, oh, I want to kind of like open the back of my legs. Here's what you can do to make this more fun. Lift one leg up, so you kind of like downward dog with one leg, and then you bring that knee in towards the elbow. And then come back into a downward facing dog, lift the other foot up, knee towards the elbow, and then back into a downward facing dog. Can you feel your core switching on with that one? So you lift one leg up, swing it up so you like downward facing dog, one leg up, then shoot that knee towards the elbow. And then,
same elbow.
yeah, same elbow. You can try opposite elbow. Some people say they feel that in their core. That's a bit more advanced because you're like twisting a lot more. There you feel your core switching on at that point.
Oh, I can feel it. You go
Yeah, you're going opposite, yeah.
to the opposite.
See? We got you to feel like, and you can go towards the opposite knee if you're a high achiever. Go towards the opposite knee.
Yeah. It's like mountain climbers, isn't it?
Yeah, mountain climbers.
Yeah.
People are really enjoying that at home. That works like the obliques. That works
It's good.
that works the muscles at the front. That works pretty much everything. So if you ever feel like you're in down facing dog and you're like, that's boring, you can do that. That's another option to doing down facing dog. And it switches on your core. So let's play with some of this in different positions now. And we're going to just go through some yogas and then feel for connecting to our core. Because we've been focused on our core for so long. See how it feels different. Warrior 2. Left toes out, right toes in. So there's a lot going on in Warrior 2. And feel free to turn your mat if you want, as well, to kind of like just make life easier. So in Warrior 2, where's the core kind of kick in? Well, it keeps our chest up, keeps our upper torso up. It also helps us twist into this position because we want to keep that leg out. If you feel this knee is kind of doing this thing was coming in, valgusing in for a technical sense, so we need to feel for opening the knees out. Boom. And then the arms are up. That feels kind of like, yeah, that feels kind of good, doesn't it? Reverse warrior, so if our right hand comes down onto our right thigh, left arm comes over. So now we're feeling for where does the core come into play with this. Taking long breaths in, noticing as you take that long breath in, you're probably not going to let your belly kind of come out too far here because it's very hard to breathe behind the shield when we're side bending and all this kind of stuff. Exhale, feel for pulling the belly in. So that transition is happening here from that full belly with intra-abdominal pressure to that contracted belly that's holding the spine in place. As I said before, to come out of this, I like to take a big breath in. Exhale. Back to that position. Warrior two. Big breath in, chest lifts up. Exhale, left forearm onto the left thigh. Extended warrior variation, right hand goes behind the back, catches hold of like your leggings or maybe the thigh. Huge breath in. Exhale, roll the top shoulder back. Noticing how you breathe in this position. It's kind of like a really weird side bend, twist, all sorts of stuff going on. Noticing that transition between a full breath and the full exhale part. And you might notice that you're not going from full breath to full exhale, that you're breathing somewhere in the middle in the middle of all that. Inhale and exhale back into that warrior two position. Let your arms come down. Notice how your core feels after having gone one way, gone the other way, come back to the middle. I'm going to play with shoulder shrugs. So, loosen the shoulders up, big breath in. I like to have floppy Kermit arms for these ones. Huge breath in. Shoulders come up. So we're elevating the shoulders. Shoulders go back, retracting the shoulders. Exhale, shoulders slide down the back and come back into that neutral position. Huge breath in. Squeeze middles of shoulder blades together, retracting the shoulder blades. Exhale, the shoulder blades come down to a neutral position. Huge breath in again. Rotating the shoulder blades down, this side, so squeeze the elbows in, squeeze them in, and exhale, bring the shoulder blades down the back. Let's do one more round, big breath in. Shoulders go up, shoulders go back. Squeeze top tips of shoulder blades together. Exhale, bring your shoulder blades down the back. Massive breath in. Squeeze middles of shoulder blades together. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Exhale. Shoulder blades coming down the back. Another huge breath in. Squeeze bottom tips of shoulder blades together. Exhale. Shoulder blades come down the back. Through this whole time, your core has been switched on, keeping your upper body kind of like up and doing stuff. Give it a round of applause because it's doing a pretty good job. To come out of this, turn your toes facing forward. Keep our toes facing forward for a second and we'll play with a little bit of flexion, a little bit of extension of the spine. Again, play with how far you want to go with this. If you don't want to forward bend too far at all, you can bring the hands onto the thighs and just come into a very gentle forward bend. Playing with maybe letting the neck go, letting the shoulders go, letting the spine come down. If you're like, I love forward bending, you can bring the hands down onto the floor and do all sorts of cool stuff. Feel free for what feels good for you.
And it's okay to bend your knees.
It's okay to bend the knees, absolutely. This question gets asked a lot. If you're in any kind of forward bend, bend the knees, absolutely. Absolutely. And then to come out of this, take a big breath in. And then exhale. Coming back up. Little bit of extension now. I'm going to bring the hands onto the hips. Big breath in. Lift the chest up. Exhale. Gently take your shoulder blades back. So you're more lifting your collarbones up towards the sky than you are thinking about bending back. Keep the butt muscle switched on so your low back is nice and engaged. And this idea of more of lifting the chest up. And then notice that again, you're doing this thing where you're going in from a breath, the breath holding the low back in, to that exhale, where it's the muscles having to take the whole kind of weight of it. And then inhale, come back to the middle. Notice where middle is. That bit where the crown of your head is over your shoulders, shoulders over the sit bones. Sit bones generally over the heels. You might feel like that feels like I'm leaning back a little bit. Warrior one, the other side. Right toes turn out, left toes turn in. Again, feel your core. Turn your chest and your hips as facing the long end of the mat. Arms come up. Whole bunch of core stuff going on here. Internal obliques, external obliques, rectus abdominis, the six-pack muscle, all this stuff is working in. Reverse warrior, right hand onto, left hand onto the left leg, right hand comes up and over. Noticing that connection between your core and this shape that you're in. Big breath in. Exhale, back into that warrior two position. Inhale, broaden across the chest, maybe retract the shoulder blades ever so slightly. Exhale, the shoulder blades come down the back. Extended warrior variation, big breath in. Exhale, right forearm onto the right thigh. Left hand scoops behind. Take another big breath in here. Exhale, roll your top shoulder blade back. Take a big breath in. Exhale, move into that position. Warrior two. The arms come down. Let's do some shoulder shrugs. Let's do 2 rounds of them. You can do these at your own pace, at your own intensity. Some people like to do really small movements. Some people like to do really big movements. You can choose which ones you want to do. I always like the big movements because I feel like my shoulder blades are moving the best. Remember, it's top, followed by middle, followed by the bottom. And then turn your feet so they're facing forwards when you're done, and then bump, 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 bump. Give your feet a little bit. Anybody feel a core there? Like usually when we're doing these poses, you feel like you're up here in your arms. Did you feel like you were like noticing what your core was doing? And could you feel your core more in those positions? Like after that? Because when you're breathing in, all of a sudden you're feeling like, oh God, I'm breathing into my obliques here or something. It's kind of quite different, especially when we focus so much on that area. Let's play with warrior one positions here, but before we come into a warrior one, step to the front of the mat. And what we're going to do is ground into the mat, and then we're going to take a step back. So step your left leg back, and then step the other leg back, floating that leg. Then step forward, step one leg forward, feel your heel strike, then float the other leg up, strike that heel down. So let's step back with the other leg, whichever the other leg was. Heel strike down, up, heel strike down. And then step back to the front, heel strike down. So we want to make this stepping back, stepping forward thing that we're doing is kind of, I'm not going to use the word graceful, because like me and graceful is like the two things, but like smooth, as smooth as you can make it. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. This idea that it's a smooth motion. Because I see a lot here of people moving from these positions. And it's a very sudden, jerky, twisty motion. And that's like, not so good for the low back, definitely not good for the core. So you want these movements to be controlled. It's probably the word I'm thinking of that's best here. So there's control as possible. So there's sort of, and you'll notice that I've seen people do yoga where they just jump to the front, their legs just flow. You know, that's how they get it. It's this slow, I'm never going to get that. Maybe another lifetime for me. But you know, it's building up this graceful movement. Because if you think about it, when we toddlers, or before we were toddlers, we couldn't walk, and we learned this very complicated movement of controlled falling. And now we can walk mostly pretty good. You know, we trip over stuff and all that kind of stuff, but we're very good at it. But there comes this point where we stop learning these movements. So most of us stop learning these movements. And so getting back into this idea of becoming fascinated with movement is good. So Warrior one, left leg back. Feel for, again, the core being engaged in this warrior one position. Lift your chest up. So we're resisting this temptation to lean forward and put the muscle weight on this hamstring. We're coming up. So the weight's evenly distributed. And then let the arms come up if that feels good. Noticing where the arms feel best for you. For some people, the arms are here. Some people can bring them all overhead. They don't feel like that's bad for the back or anything. But we want to resist this temptation of bending at the low back in order to bring these arms back. We don't want to be like the chimps, you know, so it's trying to work this shoulder mobility movement in a place that feels like it's where we want to be. And some people just don't like to have their arms up, and they just have their arms down. And you know what? That's fine too. Whatever feels good. Warrior one, back bend. So we bring the hands down onto the hips here. Inhale, lift the chest up. Then exhale, feel for taking the shoulders back ever so slightly. So you've got your butt muscles switched on, your core switched on, and you're leaning the shoulders back ever so slightly. Here you can choose, are you the person who likes to have your head lowered back? Or you want it in a neutral position, or some people like to have it lowered forwards. Find a place. For balance purposes, you're probably better off having your head in a neutral position. Some people like to have that opening in the front of the neck. I used to, kind of like less so these days. To come out of this, take a huge breath in and exhale, coming up into that upright position. Notice how that exhale that we do in yoga, that ujjayi exhale, activates the core, the whole thing. Still in this position, eagle arms. So bring your elbows up in front of you. Cross the left elbow over the right elbow and bring your hands together. You might be able to bring your hands together. You might have them like waving at one another. You might even want to have a bell. Take a big breath in and lift the elbows up ever so slightly. Feel that serratus anterior muscle working, the one that when we were reaching up and we were lying down on our backs. Exhale, feel for sending the elbows forward a little bit. Maybe even letting the head come into the hands. From here, we can come into an ostrich, which is essentially a forward bend holding onto the hands. You can come onto the thigh if that feels like it's better. Here. A little bit more support. Inhale, unwrap your arms. Use your core to come up. Exhale, coming back up into that warrior one position. Step the back leg forward. Feel for that heel strike. Your hips a bit of a shake. It's much harder when you think about the core. You feel like the core support all the time. It makes the poses easier, but also makes them in some ways more intense because you're so much more focused on rather than just letting your body move into whatever place it wants to be. The other side, right leg goes back. Turning the hips and the chest, and then boom, facing forwards. Bending that front knee, getting into this position where you feel like your chest is not in this forward flexed position. Feel the butt muscles switch on here. Feel the arms into whatever position feels like they're good for you today. A thing that I like to cue with the arms here is this idea of reaching with the hands. So whether you're reaching up or reaching forwards, this idea that the arms are actually active and doing something, and you feel your core become much more switched on at that point. Bring the arms down, we're going to come into a warrior one, gentle back bend, hands onto the hips. Big breath in, lift the chest up. Exhale, gently let the shoulders come back. So again, a very gentle back bend here. Use your hands to lift your torso up out of the hips.
So we're giving the low back a little bit of extra support here. Big breath in. Exhale, coming back into the upright position. Eagle arms. Right elbow over left this time. So arms out in front. Right elbow over left. Bring the hands together if they're going to come together. If not, have them waving at one another. Ostrich. Comes into a forward bend, keeping hold of the arms. Coming up over the thighs is the easiest version of this. You can bring your hands down onto the floor if that feels like it's open to you. And then you inhale in, exhale, come out of that one, back into that warrior two position. And then step to the front mat point. Feel how that feels. We've done warrior ones, we've done warrior twos. Next thing we haven't done is play with lunges, especially when we're focusing on the core. Again, it's very much like warrior one, but when we said earlier, when I said it right at the beginning almost, that when we have different ranges of motion when we're sitting, kneeling or standing, it's in lunges that we feel like the back can't move as much because we're taking the knees, taking the feet out of it. So there's a different range of motion for the back, and it's actually quite interesting to play with what that different range of motion is. So, stand at the front of the mat, take your left leg back, bring your hands down to the floor, and then bring that back knee down. So we're coming into that lovely, lovely lunge position. Again, same things apply with the upper body here. We want to resist this temptation to come up over this thigh here. This can be quite nice in some places for extending the low back, but it's not really a lunge position. So we're pressing this foot down into the floor, pressing the back foot down into the floor. If this gives you a cramp, you can come up on the toes. Pick the one that doesn't give you a cramp. Reach the chest up, and then the arms can come up if that feels good. Again, some people want to be up here, some people want to be up here, some people go, this arms thing just doesn't work for me, and they just have their arms down. A variation that I quite like of this is to have the hands on the thigh, and so I'm pressing hands into thigh, thigh to hands again, just like we were doing in those ab positions. So the core is engaged, the obliques are engaged, and then I'm sinking my hips forwards. So this is kind of like those ab positions we were doing before. The internal, external obliques are switched on, and I'm getting a lift, I'm pressing in there, but I'm also getting into the hip. I like this a lot. This for me is a nice position, because it doesn't mean I can go too deep and like go, whoa, that's too deep for my hips. I can control it, it's quite a nice feeling. Coming out of this is exactly the same as everything else we've done. Take a big breath in, and then exhale so that your hips are over that back knee. Twisting lunge. Left hand comes down onto the floor. If the floor feels like it's miles away, you can have your hand on a block. 3 options for the arms. Option 1, this hand can go up into the sky. This is the classic version. If this doesn't work in your shoulder, you can bring that hand down onto the hip. The other option is you can bring the hand down onto the knee and press into the knee and help you turn into this easy twisting lunge, a little bit easier twisting. I again quite like this as a way to switch on the core. And sometimes I do it just before moving that top hand back into that position, because I feel like I'm getting a little bit more of an opening, and boom, I'm in this position. Main Coon cat stretch, this hand up in the air or wherever it is, boom, comes down onto the floor. So you've got both your hands on the inside of that front foot. Lots of options here with this one. The easiest option here is to think about sinking your chest down towards the floor. So you're getting in lower than this knee. Be wary of this knee traveling out too much. You can kind of stress the hip. For some people and the way that their hips are made, this might just be the way you are. But be careful it doesn't put you into any place of pain in order to get into it. Ideally you want this knee, these knees and this knee and this toes in front here to be facing forward. If you're a high achiever and you want to go further, you can tuck the back toes under, lift that back leg up. Notice how this is very much like a plank, but just on one side of the body, because the other side is supported by that front leg. If you're feeling this in the wrists again, maybe having hands on blankets, maybe having the hands on blocks. If you're flexible enough, you can bring your elbows down onto the floor, but that's a kind of like, you could elevate your elbows with blocks as well. That's another option. Then bring whatever knee that's up in the air down, and from there we're going to come into a pigeon with a right leg forward. Some people can slip into a pigeon easily with their leg in this position. If you're not one of those people, come back into a tabletop position, and then bring that knee up and shoot that knee between your hands. Notice how your abs are working to shoot that knee in between your hands. And then set yourself up for whatever pigeon works for you. If pigeon doesn't work for you, there's a couple of options. Option one is that you can bring that hip down onto the floor, so you're sitting in more of a, do that on the other side, more of a pigeon 1990 position. If that doesn't work for you, then you could do pigeon lying on the back.
Adrian, does it matter where your foot is in pigeon?
There's so much debate over pigeon.
Should it be there? Or should it be there?
Yes, this is a very good question. Where the foot position is in pigeon. If you can get into this knee forward, foot underneath you position, you're stretching the piriformis muscle and glute muscle, either way. Some people like to add this rotation, so this leg comes
that feels more
at 90 degrees.
for me.
That helps people's knees. Some people's knees, this feels more comfortable to have the leg out like this.
Yeah.
Other people, it doesn't work for them. Which is why I always say, find a place for this leg that just works for you.
Just comfortable.
Just comfortable.
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah, so I would say, ease off that bit, yeah. And then come out of that one really slowly. We stayed that one for a long time.
It was nice.
It was not. Did you like that?
I love pigeon.
See, it's good for you again. Like if your sacrum wants opening, because it's stretched. Because the sacrum is in the middle. You've got the sacrum, and the hips are on either side. You've got the sacroiliac joint on either side, which is where the spine moves within the hip. And pigeon gets into that joint area and opens it out for some people. Some people who aren't used to having that opened out feel like, that's quite a panicky position. So like people love or hate pigeon. But eventually, if you're doing it slowly and staying within your own range of motion on it, you quickly get to that point where you're feeling like it's comfortable. And I think for you, it was like that, wasn't it? In the beginning, you were like, didn't want to go into it. And then slowly, being in your own space with it, it helps. Let's do the other side. So lunge from the other side, stand at the front of the mat, give your legs a bit of a... Then, right leg steps back. Hands come down onto the floor, back knee comes down. Lunge. You get to pick your lunge here. Pick whichever one feels best for you. I like this hands on my thigh thing because I just feel like, yes, it just feels good. I always cue this as you're feeling like this bit here where your pocket is. But yeah, men have pockets, don't they? But the pocket area opens for me. That's why I'm feeling it. What was that? Knee. Surprised my ankle hasn't clicked to that. I'm surprised that. Noticing even in this lunge position how that breath changes things, how there's an interaction between your breath and between how much effort you're having to put in. Inhale and then exhale back into that upright position. Just this front foot, so everything's a little bit square. Twisting lunge, right hand comes down onto the floor or onto a block. Left hand could be up in the air, on your hip, or on this knee here. Pick whichever one feels like it's the place for you today. So here you're in sort of a side bend, you're in sort of a twist, your hips are in a twist as well.
you're going to feel like the breath here is kind of restricted in some ways. And so it's breathing in a way that feels like it's loosening and makes the pose feel better. But you'll find that you can't over breathe in here. You can't be like a full massive exhale, full massive inhale. So it's breathing in a way that just feels, with this pose, makes it Main Coon cat stretch, so both hands down on the floor by that front foot. Options here, option one, again, sink the chest down towards the floor as much as possible. Option two, curl those back toes under, lift that back knee up. Notice how this feels like a plank. Option three, maybe bringing the forearms down on the floor, or I always say with this one, find one that you feel like you can stay in for about 5 to 7 breaths. Or stay in one place for 2 or 3 breaths and then shift into the other one for the remaining breaths. Don't feel like just because you've picked a pose that you're committed to that pose. You're not committed to a pose. You can change. And then from that, bring your knee down or whatever it is, and then come into a pigeon with your left leg forward. Again, lots of different pigeon options here. How do you feel, Estelle, if you just come down into a pigeon like this with your hips down on the floor and the knees in this 90-90 position? Like that. Gets into the piriformis in a way, because you're externally rotating that thigh. Does it feel unstable?
I'm always sore up here.
IT band.
So that's why I really struggle with the side plank, because I can't land.
Yeah.
Can't put pressure on that side. So this feels better on this side.
That feels better. That's like, yeah, see,
straight.
You know what works for you.
Rather
than that.
Because this hip goes right down.
Goes right down.
I can't move that one.
That's its end range. Yeah. Okay.
So it's I have to live.
So you know yourself.
Yeah.
So you might actually find as well that block underneath the hip helps you. So you can have a block underneath that hip like that, so you're resting
On
up.
this side,
Yeah. So you're not actually putting the knee into some flexion. So you can sink into that block a bit, feel like stuff's happening, but you're not going too far.
I don't feel anything there.
Don't feel anything?
No.
Maybe for you, you don't want to feel it.
Yeah.
How's that feel?
See that?
Yeah.
That on that side with that leg straight, it feels really comfortable.
Oh, there you go. You found a comfortable spot. In pigeon as well. And then let's stay in pigeon for a couple of breaths and then be thinking about coming out of pigeon. We've worked a lot on the core, and one great pose for sort of like bringing this whole core thing to play is half moon. There's a lot of different ways to do half moon, and I always say one of the best ways of doing half moon, if you're not used to it, or even if you're just like, I want to get my alignment right, is to use a wall. So if you have a wall and no risk of setting off fire extinguishers, those go off, we'll make a great YouTube video. And I always think also having a block helps, and I'll explain why I like blocks in a second. If you want to borrow that block, you can borrow that block. If you don't want to, you can also use a chair. The chair's great for this. So what I have is I have my block in my right hand here. I have my weight on my left foot, on my right foot. And you kind of generally want your toes pointing 45 degrees. The other foot is light. Boing. Feel that leg lifting up. The opposite leg. You can also be like on the toes of that leg. This hand comes down onto the floor, onto a block. Then I start working, lifting that leg up and opening the chest out towards the mat. This room's great because this wooden thing, you can rest your foot on that wooden thing. So like this thing here, I can rest that. It's like perfect. Actually, it's a bit low for me, so I have to lift my leg a bit higher.
That's nice.
If you feel like, God, lifting my leg up is hard, you can play in this place where you're bouncing this leg up. This is why a block is good. Pressing down into that block is even better because it helps you open the chest out and stops you collapsing in that shoulder. to do the other side as well. So once you've done finished on that side, swap over to the other side. Again, my left leg, toes about 45 degrees out, block in my left hand. Playing with this idea of taking the weight onto the left leg, left hand block. Didn't go off. It's going to stay on the floor for now. There we go. There we go. That didn't happen. Again, yeah, so you're working on using the core. You're in this side bend position, a little bit of a twist, twisting, lifting that leg up, but leaning into the wall makes it like a million times nicer. And part of it is that you're finding that place what's level. What gets people a lot with half moon is that they're in this position and they're trying to fight with whatever. Well, they're like, what is level here? What is level? But giving yourself something to lie down with against the wall teaches you where that flat back position is.
That's fucking forward.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. You need half moon. Great one. I like how everybody's got different ways of the block. I've always had this thing with the block where I just have the block in my hand and wherever it falls is generally the right spot. And if I then want to kind of like come down onto the floor, I toss the block out of the way. Everybody's got a different way with it. The wall is your friend with so many of these things where there's a twist and sort of anything going on where you're trying to find your proprioception. I always kind of like saying yoga, the perfect thing you have is your mat and a wall. So if you have space during yoga class to have a wall, whether to have your back against, or be able to have like a mat amount of space and not fire extinguishers to kick like I just did, it's great. So and it really helps with poses like half moon, but also if we're doing things like downward dog on the wall, dolphin on the wall, those kind of things are really cool. So everybody's finished, cool. Let's come into kind of some warm downs now from having the core switched on. We've done some back bending, but not too much back bending. But we've done enough to say we probably need to cool down the back. But before we kind of start cooling down the back from a back bend, let's play with Sphinx pose. Sphinx pose for me is easiest to come from lying down on the mat. And then I bring my elbows in underneath my shoulders, hands together, squeeze my butt muscles a little bit, and feel how squeezing the butt muscles lifts my back up, lifts my upper back up a little bit. And this is quite a nice place to be in. This is quite nice for sciatica, this is quite nice for sacrum issues. If you feel like your sacrum's a little bit tight, so your low back feels tight, one option in Sphinx pose is to widen the legs a little bit, so maybe bring them as wide as the mat. That takes some of the pressure off them, and then she can be a bit nicer. So play with this leg position. Don't feel like, yeah, legs have to be in one place. Find that place that works for you. And the same thing happens here as you breathe in. The breath is supporting the core, and you actually feel it if your belly's pressing into the mat. And as you exhale, it's the muscles of the core that are supporting your back. And then come out. I like to come back all the way down on the floor, and then roll on your back. For pigeon on the back and Shavasana. Because Shavasana is going to come in a minute, it is going to come. Trust me. Have your blanket handy. Pigeon on the back, I would say keep this as simple as possible. Have your legs bent. Bring one ankle over the opposite thigh and just hang out there for a few breaths. You don't have to do anything, you don't have to force the leg down, you don't have to just stay in this position for a few breaths. It helps open up the hips, it helps relax the low back. It lets the low back decompress into the mat a little bit. And then swap over, a couple of breaths on the other side. This is a great position for sciatica as well. It's quite, especially in those early points of sciatica, you can go deeper into this pose, but this is great for just those early points of that flare up. Then let your legs come to the floor, and this is where you get set yourself up for whatever Shavasana you want. A great version of Shavasana, after having done so much core work, is legs up the wall. Because if you feel like your hamstrings are tight, this is actually great for relaxing the hamstrings, because the whole point of Shavasana is that you're relaxing so that the legs get to open out in a way without you kind of forcing them. Also, you're putting some level of sort of taking the pelvis into a posterior tilt. And that actually helps to give those front ab muscles a little bit of space. So they're slightly getting space here, so they're not having to stretch so much. This is a nice place to be, but you can choose whatever version of Shavasana works for you. And spend a few minutes chilling out in Shavasana.
start to become aware of your breathing. And then gently sending a couple of breaths into that belly area, into that core area. Being thankful and grateful and appreciative of all the hard work that it does in our day-to-day life. And it's an area that's quite neglected in terms of attention. Loving your core, loving your belly, loving your abs. And the power that gives you, the power that you've maybe discovered, rediscovered, strengthened today. And then gently starting to move. Maybe starting with something simple like fingertips and toes, and then your hands and your feet, and gently working that movement inwards towards the core, and maybe noticing that it feels like it's had a little bit of a workout. And starting to move, and if you're at home, you can stay in Shavasana for as long as you want. If you're here, unfortunately you can't. And slowly making your way into an upright position, and noticing that as you're coming up into that upright position, how much your core is working and how much effort it's putting in, just in that very simple movement. And then coming up and then doing whatever feels like you need to do to well, thank you everybody for joining me today for Core Connection. I hope you found a connection with your core. A couple of points. First off, if you're like, there's a lot of information, I don't remember anything, this video will be recorded and you will be there for future reference. So you can always dip into it. B, if there's any questions that you feel like, I've got questions, then always feel free to drop me a line. You can either drop me a message in the Facebook group or Facebook Messenger or email or whatever. You can ask me in a class. I'm always available for academic questions. So, thank you very much. I hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you stay connected with your core throughout the whole weekend. And I hope to see you all again real soon. So, have a great day. Thank you very much for joining me on your Saturday. And there will be further connections. We'll be doing shoulders, we'll be doing legs and hips at some point in the future. So, thank you very much. Have a good day. Diolch yn fawr, Trabo. Goodbye. Thank you very much. Lovely to have people on Zoom as well. You were all working hard. Thank you.